5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we've got puppet looking good. Control, buttery, crunchy, and lights.
It's so dank.
How is it out there at this hour, Brent?
Dank. We are designed to think in narratives, right? We're the human brain thinks in narratives, and it's how society organizes itself. And what has happened now is those narratives are leaving the hands of centralized parties, right? And are now accessible on an individual basis, right? They're being communitized.
It's time to switch on the computer. And let's get computing.
That's the fun part, right? Like buying's cool and looking at the art's great, but like a lot of the fun is around like getting the research and sharing the knowledge and stuff. So
how many NFT collectors in the crowd? Yeah, all right, cool.
Testing. 1, 2. Testing. Hello, and welcome to episode 0 of the Dankness. I am Dan Sickles. I am joined by none other than Artnome. How are you, sir?
Doing great, Dan. How are you?
Oh, I am wonderful, and thank you to Stella for that wonderful introduction. It's a very, very vibey way to lean into our first episode.
Dank. Very dank. Proper dankness.
Extra dank.
Dank.
So what are we doing, Artnome? What are we doing here? What's going on?
Yeah, I think these bear markets are the best time, right? Because we can kind of slow down and have more fun and do things that are more experimental, right? And I felt like, you and I kind of hit it off when you invited me to do an interview for your upcoming documentary. And I thought there was a time and space for us to finally, now that like people aren't like constantly chasing after the next opportunity every 5 seconds, we can kind of slow down and talk to our friends in this space and get them to open up maybe a little bit more just as humans. And instead of them feeling like they have to give that same consistent description of like, okay, microphone's on, I'm going to go through and give the same answer I give everybody else. Like, now that things have slowed down, we can kind of just have some fun and get people to relax and get to know each other a little bit more as humans. And I also just like the experimental nature of kind of doing something where we don't really know what it is yet, right? And like living kind of on the edge of creation, and thought you would absolutely be the person that I would want to do this with. So yeah, I think we're going to learn what this is as we go to some degree, but I'm pretty excited about it.
For sure, me too. Like, and I think that even backing up, the crypto art space and the NFT space, it's ever evolving, and sort of definitions hardly exist, which is probably for the good and the bad. And I think that like something that we're going to be doing here is kind of like figuring out what this space and with this emerging medium and genre, and there's so many different ways to think about it, what it means to certain individuals. And you and I, we have the opportunity of really speaking to some of the greatest minds working in this area.
Art is
and
happening.
To really touch on some of the mythology that's laid the foundations of this space and really brought it to where it is today. We'll talk sort of about how we met a bit later, but you are really the only person that I can think of that I would want to embark on the adventure of making a podcast in 2022 with about crypto art. But very, very honored to do it.
Yeah, and of course our man Stella as well. So we are a trio. I don't want to jump the gun, but I think the three of us, we've got Stella dropping from the soundboard these amazing sounds that will keep us keep it light and fun and interesting. So yeah, psyched to have Stella in the mix as well.
for sure. And for people who don't know you, for people who might be coming across this podcast, not knowing anything about crypto art, not knowing anything about Artnome, can you just give us a bit about your background, where you come from, how you fell into this space?
Yeah, sure, you bet. So I'm sort of famously long-winded, but I'll try to keep it sort of short. So I always start the same way. I tell people I'm born into a family of engineers, but all I ever wanted to do was be an artist, right? So this goes back to when I was like 4 years old. I won the award in kindergarten for like best pumpkin drawing or something like that, right? And
When is
I think
stuff
it might
art?
even have made it into the newspaper, like the town newspaper. And up until that point, like I showed no real aptitude for like the family, thing, which was really like math and science and engineering and building things, right? And I felt like, well, this is a thing that I could be. I could be an artist. Like this could be my
this is art,
identity,
dude,
right?
duh.
And I ended up not doing that great through school growing up, but really it wasn't until I got into college and I could kind of focus on art and art history and these things that I was really deeply passionate about that I found my tribe and sort of my purpose in life and what I wanted to do. But, going into art school and certainly coming out of art school, all the adults around me were like, what are you doing? You're throwing your life away. You're going to spend all this money on an art degree. There's going to be no opportunity. You're not going to be able to find a job when you get out or whatever. And it turns out they were right? So I graduated from college
Exactly.
in like 21 or so, traveled around the country a bit with some friends, came back and started my job search on 9/11, the 9/11. So like, couldn't find any work to do, kind of through nepotism, ended up through a friend of my dad getting this job, kind of shooting digital video, which I was actually pretty lousy at as a technical reporter, which is funny because I'm neither technical nor a reporter. But that got me into the digital side of like learning, like taught myself Photoshop and Illustrator and all this other stuff. And it kind of kicked off this voyage where I saw a path where art and tech could go together. Fast forward to 2007 to 2010, and I went back to school nights to really go deep and study the history of digital art and actually learn how to code and create generative art and kind of developed a real passion around the digital art side of things, while working daytime, still trying to put the roof over my head in mostly startups and software startups in the Boston area. Fast forward to Artnome, which is about 5 or 6 years ago, which is what most folks know me for. And I was kind of still looking for that juicy project like I had in grad school where, I could do something I cared about nights and weekends in addition to my day job. And I had created this crazy database, the world's technically, at the time, the world's largest database of analytical, the largest analytical database of complete works by 20th century artists. So this, talk about dorky and nerdy. Like, I still get a little bit red when I'm talking about this because it's, kind of embarrassing.
But it's an important part of, I think, what really led you here, too. It's sort of a pivotal moment, I would say.
That's right, baby.
I think so, too, yeah. So I read this book called Provenance, and in the book, they talk about how something like 15% conservatively, like 15% of artworks are actually forged or misattributed. So this is like artworks in museums and that go on auction. And as someone who grew up with art history being kind of like the closest thing I had to religion, I was super freaked out and bummed out. It was kind of like someone rewrote my Bible. So not only were people forging artworks, but in this particular book, Provenance, they talk about a duo that were forging the provenance itself, the paperwork or the documentation.
Art.
Art it
And
is.
as someone that worked in the daytime in a big data and database companies, I thought, well, this is stupid. Like the fine art world is like a $60 billion a year market, right? And then we know there's these museums that are super expensive with temperature controlled rooms and security guards, and all these things are signals, social signals that we care a lot about art, right? That we really care about art. So there must be a list somewhere of all the artworks by all these famous artists. So I emailed Harvard and the Smithsonian and the Getty Institute, and I was like, where's the database that has all the known works by all these artists, right? And they all said,
read my lips.
They said,
No.
read my lips. They said there is no such thing as a database that has this list, right? And that they thought it was important, but they wondered if it was even possible. So I kind of said, well, maybe I could take a shot at it and see what I could do nights and weekends as one person, and that might be able to help, show what a larger group of people could do. So that kicks off this process where I go around the world gathering these giant books called catalog raisonnés. I usually tell people to give them some context, like the Picasso catalog raisonné until recently was about $200,000. So these aren't like books that you just get on your bike and go to the local library or whatever. They're like very wealthy collectors have them, and they're in like very special libraries, and like there's a whole like hilarious set of stories about how I like learned that I can't like scan all of these things in libraries. But a few years later, I ended up having all this data, and I'm like, how do I get this information out into the world? I was really mission driven, like half mission, half midlife crisis. And I'm like, how do I get all this data out into the world so that if I get hit by a bus, people will know about it? That starts artnome.com. For the first year, it's really about bringing analytics and art history together. I thought, well, gee, this is an embarrassing, nerdy hobby to have, right? But within a few months, I realized there were a bunch of other nerds around the world that I care about the intersection of art and tech too. And like traffic started taking off, and I got invited to these different presentations with like Christie's and Sotheby's. Like, ironically, this art world that I wanted to be part of like 20 years earlier, but couldn't crack my way into. Now they were asking me to come present because I had this data, and they were like, oh, that, seems like it could either be a threat or at least interesting, right? And on the breaks, when I would go and have dinner afterwards or coffee breaks, they would, I would ask them, why is it that no one in this art world, this sort of fancy capital A art world, is talking about digital art? Because I think like digital artists and digital art is the most important art of our generation. And people were like, oh no, computers can't make art, and like art with computers doesn't really matter. So that's when I pivoted and turned Artnome into being really focused on digital artists, because I felt like I had this audience and really the ability to point out what I think are some of the best artists of this generation, right? So that mission, again, I warned everyone I was going to be long-winded, but that mission of wanting to get digital artists out there and express how important they are brings us right through to this podcast, right? Everything I've been doing for the last 6 years is about, supporting and making opportunities for digital artists. Around late 2017, I learned about the blockchain. And I'm like, look, we need to build a new art world from scratch, right? So, and why from scratch? Because I knew hundreds of artists at this point, right, that I had graduated with and had all gone to school or not gone to school and were still making art, but not one of them, not one was making a career out of art, right? They all were like either teaching or had some other job or just gave up on art altogether. So when I looked, when I looked at that art world that wasn't serving any of us, I'm like, maybe the blockchain and this new community of people that want to build a more decentralized approach to a new art world where people from all around the world could actually have an opportunity to be rewarded for their talent and their skill, we could just kind of start something new. And that kicked off the journey that I'm sure we'll cover in depth later that led all the way up to today, kind of a wild ride through NFTs.
That's good.
Nailed it. Yes to all of it, and we're definitely going to chat a bit more about how we met and for me, I think it's I'm still synthesizing how I ended up here, to be honest, because I'm not really a tech guy. I didn't come from that background. Like Excel is still extraordinarily difficult for me to use. So I'm not necessarily somebody that I would expect to know how to use a MetaMask. And even more than that, I would say even a few years ago, if somebody asked me what my community online looked like, I think I would sort of scoff at the question and be like, what does that mean?
You have explained, and still I do not understand it.
Exactly. It's... There's a history for sure of my fascination with the aspects of culture and like the communities within it that are sort of marginalized and misunderstood. And there's a big part of that happening in crypto culture for sure. That has definitely brought me to this space like a moth to a flame. And then to the other side of that coin, I think that there's a certain amount of empowerment that happens just by virtue of opening yourself to this sort of globalized community of digital art appreciators who sort of more or less get like what this is and like the potentiality of where it's
This is
headed.
art?
And it's like I've definitely found a home in that, and it's been a really exciting adventure that I think for me personally, like I'm still at the start of, I'm definitely somebody, I would say open-minded as to like when it comes to definitions and how they apply to this particular space. Someone who tries to listen typically more than speak. And to that end, for the past nearly 2 years now, I've been developing a film about like this emergent community. Really, is really actually what it is, more so than anything else, of artists and devs and thinkers that really sort of put together and laid the foundation for definitely what I think is the future of the art space, but also way beyond. I'd say that for me, like really, like this is exactly. And that is the feeling of hopping into this space, and I still very much feel like I'm Alice, like falling into that wormhole, But I think ultimately, what it boils down to is that what's happening here when we talk NFTs and crypto art and all of that is it's like sort of the most liberated, potent form of expression potentially that exists in 2022. Right, and that's why there's so much to talk about, and that's why it's taken me personally like the better part of 2 years to sort of work with so many different people in this space to put together, on one hand, a singular version of what that story is, but then also a more decentralized archive version of what that story could be, and looks like in that way too. So yeah, it's for me. This is sort of it's kind of been a left turn that I've been like living in for the better part of 2 years that I feel very comfy in now. I think personally, like falling into this, I've been held by probably like the largest percentage of brilliant minds in any one industry or space that I've seen. Like everyone is like very wacky and has their own very particular perception and flavor that they bring to what's happening here. And that's why I think it's also kind of a cool space to not know so much, right? And to sort of like hang out in the sandbox with other people who are in the sandbox and just talk about what the sand is looking like and what you're doing with it.
We're here for the party.
And I think that's like largely what we're here to do. The Artnome, it's an honor to start this journey with you of bringing other brilliant minds from across the world, because really this is a global movement, and I feel like we always need to remind people that. Into these conversations so that we can also help share this brilliance with more people. And as you mentioned earlier, the two of us are accompanied by Stella.
It's so.
Yes, our band leader, who will maybe one day do a bit of talking. You might get to know this person a bit more, but has a pretty diverse soundboard at their disposal. So. I think is largely going to be communicating through through that means, but has also doing these incredible soundscapes that are going to be part of this work at the Dankness. So as we sort of wind up this segment here, I do sort of want to again, like step back for anybody who might be coming to this podcast because they heard about it from a friend and are still wondering what we're talking about when we say that we're doing a podcast about crypto art and cool. NFTs. What is that? What's going on with that? I've heard like so many different things about it. Like there's like, you've heard ABC in 60 Minutes, and your Aunt Sally has told you something horrible about what's going on in this world. I wonder if we can sort of set the context for what crypto art and NFTs means for the Dankness and for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to give my my shot in definition on it. I think the reason why it's so hard to define crypto art is because, at least by my definition, it's open to multiple definitions. That's part of the core of the definition, right? So the fastest, shortest definition of crypto art for me, the one that I think captures the historical relevance, is that crypto art is what happens when you let everyone participate, period. Right. So that was the original goal, right? NFTs are a separate thing, and we'll get to what NFTs are in a second, right? But there are multiple ways that you can define crypto art, and mine's going to come with a bias. But when I try to define crypto art, I try to figure out what is unique about this moment that will actually matter 100, 200 years from now. I don't think it's going to be, and this could be controversial, I don't think it's going to be that people made art that featured Ethereum symbols or Bitcoin symbols. I mean, that's cool. Like, if that's your jam, that's great. I own some pieces like that. I don't think anyone's going to care specifically that you used a Bitcoin symbol in your art 200 years from now, right?
Exactly.
Similarly, I don't think that it's that artists are using technology, meaning the blockchain. Artists have been using technology for a long, long time, right? So that's not news. It's not like, oh, wow, artists are using, technology, and there's this distributed ledger or database called the blockchain. I mean, that's part of the story, but I don't think that's the central thing. For me, what crypto art is, and the central thing is, there's this time period, and this is why I start with Rare Pepe Wallet, where people started saying, what happens if we just literally let everyone participate, right? They looked at the same way that cryptocurrency...
The first civilian art movement. That's how Robness would qualify it.
Yeah, I think Robness has a point there in that... when you talk to like Joe Looney and the guys that started Rare Pepe Wallet, they had zero interest in judging how good or bad the art was that was coming in, and they took no cut, right, of anything that was sold in primary or secondary on the market. And so those two things alone, right, put them in almost 180% opposition to the traditional art world. So no cut, no curation. Then the other part that sometimes gets lost, and of course there are pioneers some of whom we'll probably talk to on this show in the future that predate the Rare Pepe Wallet. But the reason I start at Rare Pepe Wallet is because there had been jokes, right? This running meme about the idea of a meme economy where people would it's laughable that people might spend money to buy a meme or to buy a digital, a JPEG that everyone can see for free. And sure, there were a couple of people, like artists, that gave demos to small crowds where they tried to show that you could make a rare JPEG or something. But with Rare Pepes, we see a whole crowd, right, come in, and it shows that it works at scale. And it's the first time that on an art-based platform, right, where the NFTs actually don't have the tokens don't have any utility. It proves out that more than one or two crazy people will actually come together and fight and bid against each other for the right to say that they own a token because it shows that these digital things are provably rare, right? So. Just to kind of close out my thoughts on it, and I want to get your thoughts because I think it matters. Everybody can have a uniquely valid perspective on this. For me, it starts with Rare Pepe Wallet. Then we see Dada NYC, where they're coming from a different angle, but they're created this platform where every artist all around the world is welcome to communicate to each other through drawing. And again, look at the principles. The principles in Rare Pepe Wallet and the principles in Dada, they want everyone to come. They're not trying to judge your art, whether it's great or bad. They don't even think it's fair to say that anyone's in a position to judge. The point isn't whose art is the best or who's the worst. It's getting mass participation, removing the barriers, removing the judgment, right? So they are pretty early, 2017, to adopt NFTs as well as a way they thought, sort of altruistically, to make sure that they could get rid of that star system, and no matter which artist sold, the wealth would kind of be distributed across all of them. So I think crypto art is an ideal that was epitomized through Rare Pepe Wallet and Dada NYC that has only been eroded since then. We do see some of it with Tezos and some of these other, groups that are trying to keep sort of that level playing field and that openness. But arguably, we've commercialized, right? If we look at particularly 2021, we've commercialized crypto art and sort of pulled it away from its ideals. So maybe that's a spicy, saucy take. This was supposed to be fun, but I'm getting all serious and passionate.
Well, this is what will continue to happen on the Dankness. One question about what a thing is. will definitely like lead us to unknown places and dimensions.
Exactly. Cool.
I
You guys
agree
are
with you
cool.
for sure. Like it's one of these like it's like answering like what crypto art or NFTs is. It seems like asking the question of what is art at the time of Duchamp, right? It's like well, give us like 5 years and like we can maybe actually talk about it with some sort of wisdom, right? I'd say that like largely for me, or the way that I see it, what's happening is that we have this sort of umbrella term of NFTs, which, you know, a lot of quote unquote OGs, people who were there when that term was developed, absolutely despise. But for better or for worse, it's sort of becoming this umbrella term that encompasses a lot of different things that's happening with non-fungible tokens, right? And that includes, and it makes sense that it would be the sort of first thing to emerge as a use case for cryptocurrency, but it includes art and it includes collectibles, and these things that, you know, you and I are absolutely here to discuss and very much in love with, borderline obsessed with, potentially even addicted to. But you know, it's really that for me. Yes, exactly. But it's really that for me that is sort of like the broad strokes of it. And then within that, crypto art, I think is sort of, it's a few different things for sure, and there's so many different ways that artists are sort of employing blockchain, right? You have someone like Sarah Meohas who you know saw Bitcoin early on and understood that to be like this new avant-garde material that she could make art with, and for her to talk so tangibly about it, it's like that's yes, it is that, right? For other artists, you know, it's purely a means of authentication. Right, like there may be a tangible art piece, and they'd like to actually authenticate it using a digital token, and it might be embedded in the canvas or something like that. It may go so far or not. And I would also say that is crypto art, but it doesn't necessarily prioritize the crypto part of the sort of term, right? So yeah, I definitely agree that like we're in the midst of figuring it out and swimming in it, and you know, I think that the two of us are definitely people that that bathe in these questions for like 30 hours of every day. We should probably have our partners on at some point to talk about that experience. But you know, we are gonna keep this fun and informative, and you know, like we do want to create a space for people who both love what's happening here and are fluent in this lingo to come and sort of meet people that they know in a new way, but then also have people who have no idea what's going on here to sort of dive into what might not be the deep end right away, but it's definitely not the shallow end.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think that's where our overlap is. You know, three things. I always say three things, and then I can only remember two because I'm getting old. But one of them is sort of the goal to want to share things we're excited about, you know, with other people, right? So some people would learn these things and just kind of, you know, engage in their own way. I think from your documentary and my early writing, there's almost like a need when you find something cool to want to share it with a broader audience, and I think we share that element. I think another thing, exactly. I think another thing is sort of this desire to be in worlds and spaces where not everything's been resolved yet, right? So the way you kind of talk about your definition of crypto art is that it's maybe a little too early, right, to nail it down and say, oh, this is what it was, because we're still in it. And like once everything's been figured out, that's when I leave a space, right? Like I like to be in a space where you're like walking on the tightrope and things aren't really clear, and you can help define it, and other people can have conflicting ideas, but it's early enough that you can all hold like different ideas, but get along, right? As this stuff is sort of emerging, right? So yeah, that was two of the three, and I have no idea what the third was. So true to behavior.
Well, yeah, I mean, to my, yeah, I think moving forward too, it's like really like for me, there's obviously aspects of this world that border on transhumanism, cyborgism, and I think that you know, employing an immutable ledger, right, with a universal timestamp, to me like hints at like a future genre of art that I think has more to do with something maybe called immortalism or something like this, you know, and will not be so caught up in the the crypto of it all eventually, because that will be so ubiquitous. That's sort of what I foresee. But it's like, again, it's like we're also nascent, and I feel like, especially myself, that it's, you can project any which way, right? We might be selling Beanie Babies to one another too.
Yeah, which I don't think is that bad, right? So two things.
I still have a Beanie Baby in my car right now that I hold very dearly. So
yeah, I mean, let's get real. It's so much of NFTs and crypto art is ridiculous, right? So if you had asked me 15 years ago, do you think there will ever be an art movement that emerges based on a database, which is really all the blockchain is, right? Like the whole world's going to get really excited about a database, and there'll be an entire art movement based on that. I'd be like, nope, that will never happen, right? I think for a lot of people that the tech side of this, they don't necessarily think about or understand. It's more just like, oh, there's a lot of cool art being made, so there's that aspect of it. But then also the absurdity, and it was meant to be absurd in the beginning, and it's still absurd to me, as serious as we take this and as much time as we dedicate to it. People are giving money for JPEGs they can see for free at the core of a lot of this, right? And if you can't laugh at that, or you ever lose sight of that, then you kind of miss the point, right? It's like, it is a little bit ridiculous, but it's the ridiculousness that I think keeps it fun and exciting.
Don't you smell the acid in the air?
and with that,
Mention it, Dina. There is an acidy taint in the atmosphere.
I think it's about time for a pre-roll.
Dank, 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 and dank, 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 dank.
I got some shit.
Dank, dank, dank.
In a world where digital art has been historically undervalued, one film is here to set the record straight. Featuring over 100 artists, collectors, and developers, each an important voice in the NFT community, partially funded with the cutest NFT project you've ever seen, Depop Studios presents I'm New Here. Learn more and mint your newbie today at newhere.xyz.
Thank you to Sum of Primes for lending your beautiful, beautiful voice to that audio teaser.
It's so!
We very much appreciate it here at the Dankness.
Well, let's see.
So I wanna talk a bit about how we met. I'm gonna go first on this one. I hopped into this space. I decided that I really wanted to work towards making a film about what was happening here, and immediately started reading as much as I could. And that included everything that Artnome had written. Some of the earliest and most important writings in the crypto art space really come from your hand, and a lot of the archive footage that exists from some of the most pivotal moments within this space. Literally, you're either holding the iPhone to record it, or you're on stage in it. So it's you're somebody who is really a cornerstone of a lot of these communities that are happening here, and definitely a major part of its history, its present, and its future. So admittedly, when I first reached out to you about the film, about recording for New Here, I was super timid. I don't like to assume that people are going to say yes to me. If anything, I assume that it's going to be a bit of a vetting process and all of that. And you're a busy person, and sort of getting that time, landing that with you in Texas. At South by, for me was it was an extraordinary achievement. There are these moments where I get off the phone, or I hop off a Zoom, and I come back to my team in this studio, and I'm like, yo, so and so said yes, we got them, da da da, let's go, and it's a moment, if we could afford champagne in this office, we'd be pouring it. And landing that time, knowing that I had a moment to chat with you about what this space was one of them for me, for my team. And then we finally got together in Texas during South by, like a crazy moment for this entire space. Like it was still like in the midst of a wild bull. So everybody, especially people like yourself, had a million things to do. But
We're here for the party.
I basically kept you in a chair, I think, for like 3.5 hours. And you graciously sat there. Yeah. And gave me so much and really sort of widened my perspective, taught me a lot in that moment. Gave me a lot more work to do to ensure that this film is like really hitting most of the right points. And even beyond that, like have been such a help at like also putting us in touch with all the right people, which is also not easy as a nonfiction filmmaker approaching people on the internet. Right.
Exactly.
It's kind of, I imagine there's a lot of people who receive messages being like, hey, you want to be in my movie? And I was one of them. So to have an ally in this process of really putting this story together has just been so valuable. And to have that ally be you in particular, it's also the beginning, I feel like, in so many ways of what I will eventually be able to say about my friend Jason Bailey. So yeah, I mean, like that's how I know you.
Yeah, I love all of that. So for me, as one of the early people really writing about the space, I actually had a podcast in early 2018 called the Dank Rares. So in addition to writing and interviewing people sort of in those early years through the writing, and I had it through the podcast, and there just weren't a lot of other people at the time. It was a smaller movement. There weren't a lot of other people sort of documenting this space. And at first that felt great because I got a lot of attention for it, right? But then as the space grew 3 or 4 years later, I genuinely started to get nervous because like it doesn't do anyone any favors or any justice to have this story told from the perspective of one person, right? So what I saw initially as sort of being a great thing, like, oh look, I'm getting this attention for the things I wrote, or a lot of it started to get out of date. There were new voices coming in that weren't getting captured, and I worried about it, to be honest, right? So when I met you, I pretty quickly, because there's a lot of emails going back and forth between people in a space, and I pretty quickly looked at your previous work, in making documentaries, and sort of saw that you were super, talented and high level of skill,
That's right,
and like
baby.
we're really good at telling stories where you brought multiple people together and sort of amplified other people's voices and told a story from multiple points of view. Sort of like the Rashomon kind of effect, and I was like, "That's it. That's what we need, right?" Like this is, the crypto art space is sort of like my baby, right? So I'm pretty particular about who I'll work with and who I want to support, particularly on like trying to tell the story. And I'm like, this guy is an expert storyteller, someone who's more, you said it earlier, more of a listener than a talker, who knows how to get people to tell and share the real stories, right? And is willing to do the work. I mean, how many people did you interview for this documentary to date?
Yeah, we're like nearly at 100, yeah.
So that's insane, right? Whoa. I mean, and the truth is, like, a lot of people don't realize that I'm actually like a massive introvert. I like look like a Sasquatch, and I live out in the woods out here. And it's only because I love the community that I go to these different events or whatever. So when I went to Austin, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to go into like a TV studio. Like that sounds like really intimidating. And then I ended up, a guy that works with us at Club NFT, who like lives in a van, which is another story, but like drives all around. He just happened to be in Austin, and we went out. It was the first time I met him, and I drank way too much tequila. And then the next morning I wake up and I'm supposed to go in and do this interview with you. And I'm like, I look in the mirror and I am just green, right? So I'm already nervous because I'm like an introvert or whatever. And now I'm like massively hungover. And I knew you had like brought in an entire crew of people, not just for me, but for all the people you were interviewing. And I'm like, I'm not going to let Dan down. So I remember that was like the longest Uber ride ever. Like the studio was like this random back lot. And as we're pulling up and I'm just like sweating from like no sleep and like tequila or whatever, I'm like, I have no idea how this is gonna go, but like you and your staff were like so welcoming and so nice and like so professional and like it was all like it made me feel super good. I think one of the worst outcomes would be if we keep moving forward and people just continuously refer to my work as much as I'm proud of it. I think it only reflects like one very small perspective on the history of the space. And what you're doing is like God's work. You're going and talking to almost 100 people now, and you're bringing all these voices together. And
Into the future.
you're the right guy to do it, right? So I mean, it's exciting, and I'm thrilled to help you anytime that I can, but also to collaborate with you in other formats and find ways to get people to kind of share their stories and we're going to have some fun and get people to loosen up a little bit. So I'm excited for where this is going.
Hell yeah. So again, sort of taking a step to the side for people who are coming into this sort of with fresh eyes and fresh ears. I think it might be useful to talk a bit about how the space has sort of changed since the two of us have experienced it, since we've come into it. We have different perspectives since we entered it at different times. The market was different, the community was different. But for both of us, it's largely, it's changed and it hasn't. So to sort of give people a bit of perspective that way, I'm wondering if you can share, since learning about blockchain, and since learning about like blockchain art, crypto art, NFTs, all of that, what have you seen?
Future.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was like there were these nerdy subcultures that were experimenting with blockchain almost in isolation, right? You had like your Rare Pepe crowd and your sort of people that were into punks and like the Dada NYC folks, and Rare Art Labs was going on. CryptoKitties, yep. And then you mentioned Sarah Mayojas, and there were a bunch of other sort of earlier folks like Nilly Lerner and Rhea Myers. Yep.
When did
Kevin
you become
McCoy.
such a name dropper?
So, there were those folks going back, let's call it like 2014 to 2016, 17, and that's when the Pepe folks start coming in. And it was really, I came in like 2 weeks before Rare AF1, which is sort of the famous event at New York City, because that's the first time that all these different subcultures and individual tinkerers and people that were coming at it for different reasons came together in one space. And they didn't come to a consensus and say like, oh, this is what it is. They came together and held the same ideas that they had when they were coming in, but were able to coincide with each other and respect each other's reasons for being there, which is like a better outcome than having everyone go there and then like agree upon what this thing was. They all came and like, well, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm doing, and kind of just respected each other, even if they weren't necessarily seeing everything the same way. I saw that as sort of this altruistic beginning where, we all thought we could like change the world. And then pretty quickly, and we need like the sad sound effects, Stella, cue it up. Pretty quickly after like this high point of Rare AF1, cryptocurrency tanks, and then NFTs start to tank. And we have these like zombie marketplaces where like, it was hard to get any artists, and even if you got artists, no one was buying anything. This is when I'm buying like X copy NFTs for $1 a pop or whatever, and like people are like, "What?"
This is when I'm buying X copy NFTs for $1 a pop.
Yeah. Back in 2018, and then it gets worse, right? So 2019, like we have this conversation at Rare AF2. Where we're all like, this is pretty much done. Yeah, we're looking at each other and we're like, no one cares. There's ICOs going on, and like ICOs are destroying the crypto name because people are like, oh, it's all a scam, right? So it's really like, just a handful of us. And then you see like 2020, credit to the whales. So there's like, I'm going to call it a dozen collectors from around the world that are largely anonymous who kind of like start buying things for like $50, $100, $150, $200, and they were competing with each other. But like really only a dozen or so people, and then some like people with less means like myself that have been kind of cruising along collecting. But none of us see the 2021 explosion. Like that comes from the Beeple sale. Really changes everything. In some cases for the better, in some cases for the worse, depending on who you ask. Right. So the reason I would say the better in order for our vision of blockchain and NFTs to grow, we needed a way for everybody to find out about it. And they sure as hell found out about it after the Beeple sale, right? Like it ends up on Saturday Night Live and Ellen and all these other things.
Art is happening.
But the primary introduction to NFTs, this thing that we thought could be like altruistic way to support like lots of different artists and like, you know, to have like more equality and opportunity and equity for artists. Now the primary entry point for the world is a white dude sold a $70 million, JPEG through a 200-year-old auction house. Like, just doesn't sound that disruptive, right? It's still about people spending amazing amounts of money through like old world art institutions, and like we were trying to do the opposite.
And Beeple also has like a history, which isn't talked about too much, of doing an incredible amount of free work for other people. So there was an enormous amount of respect from the artist community before that $69 million sale even happened, too. So there is a history of doing free work for years before that happens. As well.
100%. Yeah, not ever meant. I've met people, super nice guy. Not ever meant to be a knock. I respect anyone that does daily work, and I even like his work, right? But I think he didn't necessarily come from the crypto art crowd, so there was a little bit of that too. You know, we can get a little saucy on the podcast. So I think there was kind of like he wasn't one of the core folks that was there from the beginning, you know, on the crypto art side, and like we thought
different
maybe
than
no, like we thought maybe it should have or could have been, you know, someone else or whatever. But to be honest, he's done an amazing job, sort of as an ambassador for the space. And not his fault. Look, if someone offered me $70 million for my work, I'd be like, hell's yes, right? But it transforms the space.
If anything, it's also supportive of the point that it's not necessarily revelatory when it's somebody who's been doing an enormous amount of free work for that to happen, you know, in terms of that sale and being that person. You know, I think it also speaks to that point, right?
Right.
He shouldn't have necessarily even had to do as much free work for people to sort of get to that spot either.
No, I'm with you. It does show sort of the before and after. You go from doing work for nothing to doing work for $70 million. There wasn't much of a ramp there, right? And it shows how broken it was, but we maybe went a little manic and swung too fast. So the space grew too fast and became about money too quickly, right? And all of a sudden, like anything anyone made, it was just like you couldn't make work fast enough, right? And like it became, the only story was about, look at this, 12-year-old who made $1 million last weekend with some random animal PFP or whatever. And like the whole idea of let's build a sustainable, equitable, art world where like people all around the world can have like at least some reasonable amount of, financial compensation for their work. And it's a way to connect with people creatively and like share ideas. And a lot of it wasn't even about the financial component. It got financialized, really quickly. And 2021 was crazy. I think there's for lack of a better word, and like to kind of round it out, at least from my perspective, we're now where I'm most comfortable, right? We're in a bear market where the only people that want to be here are like the artists and the builders and the creatives that actually, care about the stuff that I care about. And I think we're actually seeing I had sort of this adversarial relationship a little bit with the traditional art world last year, where I kept saying like, NFTs are awesome and they're great. And look at all these people that care about art now. And like all these artists are getting this opportunity. And a lot of times my art world friends were like, oh, those aren't real artists, or like those aren't real collectors. But that's died down. And I think the bridge, there's sort of a bridge now between the traditional art world and sort of all this new interest. And I think it needed the whole space needed to simmer down for us to get to that point. But anyway, that's sort of how I've seen it, the art of
calm down.
Yeah, for sure. I was sort of one of these people who, I was around before the Beeple sale for sure, but definitely came in sort of like on this wave of Nifty Gateway, sort of at the end of 2020, right? And really by virtue of an artist that I had been following for a while. There's an artist named Kidmograph who, I was following on Instagram and had known there, and then was like, oh, okay, cool, like Nifty Gateway. I've heard about these NFTs, whatever. And then it was like, the credit card on ramp. So, if anything, it's I sort of came in a very vanilla way to this space, and I am one of like the new arrivals. Even coming in that moment, I think the amount of noise that was generated in the following like 365 days was just like something that I had never even that I hadn't seen culturally ever. we haven't lived through multiple generations, so it's kind of hard to say, but it was wild. And every single day, like there was a moment where, I mean, there were months on end where like there wasn't anything else even possible to pay attention to because, the machine was just running so well and at full speed and maximum productivity and talking. Everyone was just like, and everything was the first and everything was the best and like everything was the loudest and everything was the most expensive and the all-time high. And it was just like, it was a wild time to be trying to figure out how to live on the internet in this way, for sure. And, I think that, you and I agree for sure that like nowadays, I mean, like working in this space, it's so much friendlier, and so much calmer, and it's nice to sort of see a lot of people. Like the historic NFT festival is happening, late October, very soon. I think after we're premiering this episode, and like it's nice to see. Us and different groups like Dada, like sort of like also grounding themselves again and being like, okay, cool, like let's like look at this history, let's recontextualize like what's been going on here, so that when like this next wave of people enters the space, like they're not so lost. I feel like I came in a moment where I think I spent, it's probably quantifiable in days, which is a shame to admit, but like of watching really shitty YouTube content, trying to understand what was going on in crypto and in NFTs and like what to buy and what that meant. Exactly. And like, it was tough. And, I experimented a lot and like certainly, I don't want to say like lost a lot because I haven't necessarily tried to sell a bunch of stuff that I've bought, but I've learned an enormous amount in this experiment. And it's I think it's still in a spot where it's inevitable. Like, I think like that the interest is definitely creeping back in. People are very
ground is like no ground
they're
I've
committed
ever
to
seen
figuring
before.
it out for themselves or their companies or their corporations or conglomerates. It's still there. And I think that like when you talk about, the early intentions and you're somebody, and thankfully I feel like I have a bit of a sense of this too, but because of the people that you've introduced me to, but what the actual intent of this space was when it started, and sort of how, some of the things that have happened in like the past year have sort of strayed from that, I think that there's a moment where we're sort of like we're finding ourselves a bit there again and being like, okay, right, what is all of this for? And like it's like I've worked in the past year with people like Pussy Riot, like Nadia, like she's done incredible work for the people in Ukraine, but also for women in the United States who can't find access to resources for birth control or abortions. And like that's using crypto, right? Like I'm working with an artist in Iran on the film who, is basically fighting this regime by making art, and sort of disseminating it using blockchain tech and like stuff like that. It's remarkable and it's still happening every day. And like there is still a pulse to this space that speaks to the early cypherpunks. And what I would say are the political intentions, whether or not we want to call them that, whatever. But it's there. So yeah, I think we're sort of meeting each other. I feel like in a way where we're kind of now on the same page. Where like it's like I don't feel so much like wide-eyed, bushy-tailed. Like, oh, okay, this is changing the world tomorrow, right?
But in a lot of ways, the experiment worked, right? Like you mentioned a few examples, and I know there are a lot of them. Sometimes when I got to the point where when I mentioned positive examples of artists' lives that were changed by NFTs, so many people would say, but that's not going to happen for everyone, that I started backing off on sharing the stories. But there are new stories every day, right? So we're going to have our friend Carlos Marcial on at some point. And he's in Mexico when COVID hits, has a family, children, rent to pay, loses his job. The government down there doesn't give out checks the way they do here, so really no safety net whatsoever. Finds NFTs, and is able to support his family, eventually buy a house, and then has now moved to Lisbon, and is able to put his kids into good schools or whatever. And people are like, okay, well that's one. And then I go down to 50 more stories, right? And I'm like, when do you want me to stop? Just 2 days ago, I was on a Twitter Spaces, and I'm gonna get his name wrong, but it's like RIIIIIIIIS on Twitter, Rise, I think it is. Hops on and gave this super sweet story at the end about how he escaped Ukraine by selling his art as Tezos NFTs or whatever. It was like yet another story that I hadn't heard. And I sometimes feel like I'm in crazy land because I hear all these amazing life-changing stories on a daily basis, but then I hear other people that are critical of the space saying, it's not really changing lives, it's not really doing anything, it's not really a new thing. And I'm like, well, wait, I know dozens of people that are it's literally changing their lives for the better. So in a way, there were aspects of the experiment that ran off the rails, that got way too much attention, in my opinion. But that doesn't mean the good things we wanted to have happen didn't happen. They just didn't get the press, and the attention that maybe they should have received. Not to get overly serious, but one of my gauges, and again, it's just me, but I'm 44 now, and 3 years ago or 4 years ago, before this all started, despite spending a quarter of my life in art school and all my friends being musicians and artists, I didn't have one friend, not one person out of hundreds or maybe thousands of friends that made a living off of this stuff, right? And now dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of people that either make a full-time living, making art, or get pretty substantial income through NFTs. That's wild, right? That's a pretty crazy change, and it's directly tieable to this space.
Absolutely. And that, Snowfro puts it exactly like that too. It's generative art. It was the nerdiest art medium, the chess club of art, right? And no one was making there was no making anything apart from the generative art. And now to see that changing, it's been hugely impactful, not only for him, but for hundreds of artists within the generative art field in particular.
Right, and the only people that think that the money doesn't matter or that, artists shouldn't talk about money are the people that have money, right? My artist friends are po. They do not have a lot of money, right? And, the opportunity to actually, make some money, you better believe money means a lot to my artist friends, and they are very comfortable talking about it because when you can't pay rent or you can't afford food or this, that, and the other, we needed a better system. We weren't treating our creative class, fairly, and we needed to invent a new way to make sure that we compensated them, right? Look at it this way. When you get a free weekend, right, do you want to go, no offense, lawyers and doctors, but do you want to go and hang out with doctors and lawyers and these other people who get paid really well for the important services they provide? No, you probably go to an art museum or to a concert. These are things that on some levels that we all know, we value and love and make our life rich. Life without music and without art sucks, right? But then on the other hand, most artists and musicians, we show no real gratitude or can provide no real compensation or no real means to encourage them to be able to keep their craft going, right? And that's what this was in the beginning. And I think when I say the experiment succeeded, it largely still is. We're going to tell these stories, I think, to some degree on this podcast. We definitely want to keep it light and have fun, but I think we're going to introduce people to some of these stories where people are there are a lot of us that went from decades of hard work. You mentioned it with people, decades of hard work with almost no recognition or compensation to really life-changing, not because they became gajillionaires, but because they got any sort of recognition. Sure. Going from nothing, matters, I think.
Also, the expectation, today it's a bit blown out of proportion insofar that somebody being able to afford their own iPad with Procreate on it by virtue of working in this space is also enough, right?
Right, but that never catches the news. That's what drives me crazy.
Right.
So, when Dan buys a work by Jason for $15 and sends a nice note, that's times a million, because those kinds of things are going on all the time. That's life-changing, but no one's ever going to send the reporters to your house and be like, oh, we need to interview Dan about this $15 artwork he bought from Jason, right? And so that's why I think sometimes the best stories get overlooked.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of media sort of about the space. There's a lot of podcasts.
We're here for the party. And
I guess like I would love to chat a bit about what our hopes here are with this one, with the Dankness, and sort of what we hope to do with all that dankness that we're bringing to podcast land.
Yeah, and we're going to get to have the people that maybe aren't so accessible to everyone else all the time. We're going to get to talk to them and hopefully get past the sort of interviews that maybe they've already read or heard in other places. And I think we have some fun questions where we're going to try to catch people thinking in new ways and sharing, new thoughts, and maybe getting a little bit more relaxed to where they can open up about how they really feel without worrying about, so much judgment. And we've got a sort of a cool section with sort of like a story time where we're going to bring folks in because, look, we all fight each other about like what's part of the history and what's not part of the history. But the idea of history in a space that's 3 or 4 years old is kind of ludicrous to begin with. Like, like way, 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 way back in history in 2018, it's sort of crazy. So, but at the same time, if we don't record it, capture it, and have people share their views, there's a chance it could be lost. So we've got sort of this tongue-in-cheek segment where we'll hear from folks on that front. I mean, I think it's going to be awesome, Dan.
I think it's going to be incredible. Yeah, it's like the space travels at like hyperspeed, right? And there is something interesting about like the moment of creation and sort of like minting, right? And automatically making that idea or inspiration an object that can be bought and traded on a marketplace and all of that, right? And I think that like something that we're definitely trying to do is sort of talk to artists in a way that is like sort of outside of what the markets are saying about the value that they create by virtue of their art, right? Because I think as an artist, it's really like you put so much of yourself into these pieces, and what the market is saying about those pieces, it can become very heady, And I think bringing people to a space and to conversation that is a bit more free of that and allows them to even be creative in how they're answering questions that they're not typically asked, I think is going to like provide anyone listening, anyone interested in meeting these people who are working in this space, some pretty cool insights into how their wacky minds work.
art, after all, is emotion.
Yeah, and look, the market's stupid. Like, the market, I've been watching the market for 5 years, and you can gamify the market. 5 people can agree that they're all going to spend too much money on one work, and then other people will come aping in and buying the same thing or whatever. Like, the idea that the market is somehow at all correlated with quality of art, like, I threw that out the window a long time ago, right? And I think there are so many amazing artists that unfortunately hang their hopes and their ego on sales, but sales and quality of art are just two totally different things. And I think you're right. There's an opportunity here to divorce, who these people are and what they create from the market. And, quite frankly, there's an opportunity to go beyond just conversations about art too, right? Like, and just kind of get to know the human being and like to realize these people are just like us in many ways and oddly different in other exciting ways that I hope they share too.
With that said, I think it's time for a pre-roll.
Hey friends, this is Artnome reminding you that at Club NFT you can analyze the health of your entire NFT collection, back up and protect your NFTs in a single click, get personalized recommendations on which art and artists to collect next, read great articles from Right Click Save, the world's leading Web3 culture publication. At Club NFT, you can kick back, relax, knowing your collection is safe. Back up your collection. Your JPEGs will thank you.
They're attracted to dank places. Dank places.
Oh, but more the dank.
So I guess we're rounding up episode 0 of the Dankness here, and I want to leave people who are listening in with some different ways that they can find more information, that they can connect with us. Definitely check out the dankness.xyz. That's going to have more information about past episodes, upcoming episodes, some rewards potentially for our early listeners, some cool things that you might be able to claim there. As that's being rolled out, definitely check out our personal handles. You can find the one and only Artnome at Artnome. That is at ARTNOME.
Oh, very nice.
I'm at Dan Sickles. That is at DAN_SICKLES. But you can also find more information about my project and about my work at newhere.xyz. There's a ton of information about the film there. There's information for how you can get involved. There's an ongoing mint as well. Artnome, where can we find more information about all the cool things that you're working on?
Yeah, so super proud of rightclicksave.com. So that is the publication associated with my company, Club NFT. We really go out of our way to get a plurality of voices from people from all different regions and areas and walks of life on sort of the fine art side of NFTs and Web3. So I would encourage folks to check out Right Click Save. And then... would be remiss if I did not remind you once again to go to clubnft.com and back up your NFT collection.
Yeah, that's right.
If you care about your NFTs, make sure that you take care of them just like anything else.
Back them up.
Back them up.
And with that, Stella, you want to bring us out for episode number 0 of the Dankness?
How is it out there at this hour, Frank?
Well, it's day.
I put it on. Suddenly, deep in a future world of fast-paced action.
Flood and Stella are audio-visual artists collaborating to make waves in the Dankiverse with their trippy, acid-infused art project called the Danktones. They have been super busy lately, working around the clock to create some mind-bending image composition, NFT art that's about to turn heads in the community. They're hitting all the retro music store vibes. The podcast cover art includes stickers, holographics, shrink wrap, and even some redacted sound effects. Yes, you heard that right. This wild duo is bringing back physical media vibes in a big way with this release. But it's not just the medium that's impressive, it's the audio-visual art itself. Flood and Stella's art is truly something special, with bright, bold colors and intricate patterns and zany sound effects that will have you feeling like you're tripping on acid. So if you're a fan of NFT art and you're looking for something a little bit different, definitely check out Flood and Stella's The Danktones project. Thanks for your time. Have a dank 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 dank.